let's go ahead and move on to censorship. I mean, in terms of the social, societal, mass formation psychosis that we're seeing really around Russia, which has a, gotta get us banned. Listen, I mean, at this point, who isn't getting banned from YouTube? So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Abby Martin, in her show, has now had 600 episodes of Breaking the Set taken off of YouTube. That is completely crazy. And it just goes to show you that there's no reason given. Now, sure, Abby used to work for RT, but when you have Russian state media and these kind of blanket bans that they say are just all going to be taken off and that content that includes them, there's no context as to exactly why any of this content gets taken off. It's just included in sort of blanket ban, and there is no discussion as to whether that content is valuable. I mean, we have played here clips from some of her content whenever the Empire Files, whenever they interrupted George W. Bush and called him a war criminal. Yeah. These are things which are valuable to public discourse and are now unable to be seen by the public. The other one that was taken off, let's put this up there on the screen, was Oliver Stone's documentary, Ukraine on Fire, which was taken off of YouTube, again, with no explanation, and has now been uploaded to Rumble. But the point is that nobody is talking about why. And listen, you may think these are out there. It doesn't matter. You know, I actually went back and watched all of Oliver Stone's Putin interviews. He has a series of Putin interviews on Showtime and elsewhere. It's a very good insight into the mind of Vladimir Putin. And if we're going to have a geopolitical conflict now with Russia, it would be, you know, maybe worth it to people in the West in order to understand how the autocratic leader of that country thinks, especially when interviewed by a Westerner like Oliver Stone. So I just feel like this total crackdown, we've explained here before, if you go back to our battle update earlier in the show, we are reading to you from Russian state media. Why? Because we need to know what they are saying to their own population in terms of what a diplomatic solution could look like. We would be fools not to do so. Yeah. I mean, what, we want it translated multiple times by the West and then read it straight from there? It's better to go to the primary source. Anyway, we're watching a full-scale crackdown that's happening right now on YouTube with no consideration for the broader consequences of what this would mean in the long run for the information environment. And I do think it is going to be highly detrimental to how Americans shape and see this conflict going forward.
Yeah, and it's not just YouTube, by the way. And I always want to say, like, Russia is actively criminalizing and threatening jail time. Just so
should we be more like the Russians?
Exactly. Yeah. We don't want to go anywhere near the direction that they're ultimately going in. I mean, Abby Martin, she was critical while she was on RT. She was critical of Russia's invasion of Crimea. Yeah. And so that just shows you how indiscriminate this is. It doesn't matter that her content at times was actually critical of Russia just because she's associated with RT. Right. It's all bad. It all has to be banned. It all has to be censored. It all has to be taken down. This is insanity. I mean, I watched Ukraine on Fire, that documentary, and you have to trust people to be able to take in information and be able to figure out what they believe and who's offering sufficient evidence and what claims are true and what needs to be balanced. And if you have a confident democracy, that's what it looks like. It looks like trusting your population to, you know, watch any kind of content from any kind of place and be able to still make sense of the world and participate as active citizens in a democracy. There's also this, we continue to track, this just really, truly reactionary hysteria around anything regarding Russia, even people and products that have nothing to do with the Russian government. Even people and cultural products that are actively anti-war and dissidents in terms of the Kremlin narrative. This is really, you know, this is an extraordinary thing. Let's go ahead and put this next tear sheet up on the screen. This 20-year-old
this is terrible.
Russian piano prodigy was supposed to make his Canadian debut with the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. He was dropped after some people emailed to complain about him, you know, just the very fact that he's Russian. So this is just like blanket xenophobia, even though he had been critical, like publicly critical of Russia's war in Ukraine. He wrote earlier this month that the truth is that every Russian will feel guilty for decades because of the terrible and bloody decision that none of us could influence and predict. So he was vocally, publicly against the war, and doesn't matter because he has anything to do with Russia. He's got to be banned. We can't listen to his music. This is insane. And, you know, it really bothers me when it comes to music and art as well, because this is one of the great connectors of humanity. I mean, this is the way that we really, the piano, like, you don't have to understand the language. It just connects on a human emotional level. And this is one of the ways that we sort of see each other as human beings around the world and create this common sense of our humanity. So it's a sad thing the way that people are reacting.
Just to give you an idea of how much we've lost our minds, during the Cold War, we actually made an explicit aim to elevate Russian culture and say that the Soviet Union was oppressing that. So we would celebrate Tolstoy, and we would celebrate Solzhenitsyn, and we would celebrate, you know, Crime and Punishment. We would celebrate the Russian symphony or ballet. Now it's the opposite, where we're like, no, the Russian regime is the Russian people. The Russian culture itself is bad. I mean, first of all, I don't need to tell you this, but there are millions of Russian Americans who have lived here for a very long time, who are proud people and who are proud of their culture. So number one, you're attacking, you know, part of your own citizens. But number two, this is the easiest way in order to turn this into some civilizational conflict and make it so that the Russian people themselves say, okay, well, it's war between all of us. And that's the opposite of what you want, given the history in terms of what that populace looks like when it unites and decides to fight against something in what it considers a civilizational conflict. So
let me also say, this is a point that Dr. Parsi actually made when we talked to him last week. So we all have this understanding that Russian policy is directed by Putin and a handful of oligarchs. Like, that's who was in charge. And the Russian population has very little say in what is happening at the top. But then how do you fit that together with, but we're going to blanket punish all of the millions of people who have nothing, who you've already admitted have nothing to do with this, and it's not their fault. And the other thing is, Russian culture is rich and it's extraordinary. Like, we're impoverishing ourselves to cut ourselves off from that. So it truly is a hysterical response.
No, it's terrible. And, you know, these poor piano prodigies. And I was just reading here in Washington, D.C. It does turn out apparently that Russia House, that bar I told you about, which was vandalized, is not owned by Russians. Classic. Even though it was vandalized, there's like Russian tea rooms. Anna Kachyan was on our show talking about how a Ukrainian woman opened a Russian restaurant because she thought it would have more popularity, and now people are boycotting her restaurant, even though she's Ukrainian.
Yeah, she's rebranding it as Ukrainian now.
It now as a Ukrainian restaurant. Let's let all of this die. Like we said, even at the height of the Cold War, we understood the value of Russian culture, which has always had a dramatic impact on the West and has always kind of given us this darker view of humanity, which is important and is important to integrate also into kind of our more sunny, idealized versions.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.